It's very good. Thank you, Jonathan. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be part of the Herzliya conference, to be with Professor Reichman, Alex Mintz, my Knesset colleagues, former Prime Minister and Defense Minister Barak. So many friends here. All right. Is still there, Kenny? Hiya. Good to see you. So first, to begin, Kathleen, thank you. Thank you from the heart for those stirring words. We don't hear them that often today. And my personal connection to Robert Kennedy, besides growing up in America of the 60s, came about 10 years ago. I was writing this book called Power, Faith, and Fantasy, which had the distinction, and I'm not being immodest here, had the distinction of being the best book, comprehensive book on America's comprehensive involvement in the Middle East. Why it's the best? It's the only book on only comprehensive history of America's involvement in the Middle East. And I'm doing research in the archives, and I come across a dispatch of letters written in 1948 by a Harvard senior, I think it was a senior there, and he was undergraduate, who I think was doing his thesis. And I start reading the letters that Robert Kennedy wrote home in 1948. And they became an integral part of my book. And if you look in the book, and it's available at a very discount price now on Amazon, you will see a picture of your father standing at the top of Jaffa Road in front of the Barclays Bank. It's one of the few places of Jerusalem that's really been unchanged. It looks exactly, even he's standing next to a bus stop which is still there. And it's a great picture. You can get the book. I'll get you the book. So I've been given no less than 3 little notes saying that I have less than 10 minutes. And this precedes the invitation to talk about U.S.-Israel relations. So in the 7 minutes I have, I will talk about U.S.-Israel relations. It is very tempting to generalize about U.S.-Israel relations and just talk about them in black and white terms. I can paint a very roseate picture of the U.S.-Israel relationship today. American support in the American public for the State of Israel is perhaps at the highest level of all times. It toggles between 70 and 74% of the population of the United States defines itself as pro-Israel in one form or another. In Congress, we have the support of both parties, house to house, wall to wall, as we say in Hebrew. All is there. That is a very positive picture. The American Jewish community, in the year and a half between the time I came back from Washington as ambassador and the time I jumped into an Israeli politics, I had the honor of being on the Birthright board, and I can tell you that Birthright has brought well over 100,000 American Jewish youth to this country for a 10-day unforgettable experience here. It's had a major impact in reinforcing American Jewish identity. American Israel is an important part of that identity. And in the security field, and I very much agree with my former ambassadorial colleague, Dan Shapiro, saying that our security relationship is closer than ever. Ask anybody in the Israeli security community, and they'll tell you the same thing. Whether it be intelligence development, intelligence sharing, in weapons development, we could not be closer than we are now. That is the roseate picture. At the same time, I can turn around and paint a far gloomier view of that relationship. The substantive and often public disagreements on the Iranian and Palestinian issues that have been mentioned previously. America, as a society, has changed. It's undergone profound demographic, economic, social changes. There are communities such as the Hispanic community, the African American community, the LGBT community, which are growing in numbers and which do not have traditionally strong ties with the State of Israel, period. There is growing political polarization in the United States where Israel is in danger of becoming a wedge issue. There is exhaustion and war weariness after 2 extended wars in the Middle East, the United States and Afghanistan and Iraq. Americans want to go home. They don't want to hear about us, many of us, anymore. We're facing all of that. And then in the American Jewish community, 85% of that community belongs to the conservative and reform movements that are not formally recognized by this country. And many young American Jews look at Israel, a society which is moving increasingly in a conservative direction, a more religious direction, while their own society is moving in the other way, is becoming more liberal, more progressive, and more secular. So there you have it, American-Israel relationships, both the rosy picture and the less rosy picture. We do not have the luxury of relying on the former picture and forgetting about the latter. We have to be proactive in addressing both aspects of the U.S.-Israel relationship. The American Jewish community. Okay. The American Jewish community, we have to live up to our historic promise to be the nation state of all the Jewish people, irrespective of how those people choose to fulfill their Jewishness or not choose to practice their Jewishness. We are the nation state of the Jewish people, and that means reaching out to the American Jewish community. We're a very small country, you've noticed. We don't have a hinterland. The American Jewish community is our hinterland, and we can't afford to lose it, which means engaging in an intimate and candid dialogue with them. As ambassador, I spent dozens, if not hundreds of hours engaging on an issue known as the Women of the Wall. Remember it? That threatened to erupt into outright violence. And we were able to resolve it, not to anybody's satisfaction, but we were able to avoid an open rift in the Jewish people by engaging in that type of very sincere dialogue. And we have to do that now as well. We have to reach out to these different communities, to the Hispanic community, the African American community. When I was ambassador, again, I would go visit a city. The first leadership I would seek out would be the Hispanic leadership or the African American leadership, whatever was the major leadership in that city, and build bridges with them. We cannot afford to lose those very important communities. We have to preserve bipartisan support for Israel. Israel must never become the prerogative of the purview of one party or another all the time. To stress, bipartisanship and bipartisan support for Israel is a strategic national imperative for the state of Israel. And on the Iranian issue, we are going to differ, but it is Israel's right and duty to express our opinion about the Iranian nuclear threat, to have our interests be made known. But I think that I feel very strongly that if we will be proactive on the peace process, our ability to stick to our guns on Iran will be greatly reinforced. And how then can we, given the situation we face today, how can we make progress on the Palestinian issue? I personally do not see a Palestinian partner sitting across the table with us. The situation in the region is not favorable to the emergence of an independent Palestinian state that doesn't have any national institutions and doesn't have an elected or non-corrupted leadership. Very, very dangerous for Israel. But even given that, we must always convince the world, but first and foremost, must we always convince the United States of America that we are committed to peace, that even in the absence of a viable Palestinian partner, we will always be at the table. And moreover, while we'll be at the table, we will be at the table committed to the vision set out by Prime Minister Netanyahu in his 2011 speech at Bar-Ilan University, a two-state solution, and that we are willing to take steps proactively to prove our commitment, which from my point of view means that we return to the understandings that were reached in 2004, and they were mentioned earlier this evening, between President Bush and then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, that Israel will restrict its building to those areas that will be part of a Jewish state in the event of the emergence of a two-state solution, in the settlement blocks and in the Jewish neighborhoods of Jerusalem, and that we will work to create what I have called a two-state situation in which 90% of the Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria enjoy de facto sovereignty, and we work to increase their coherence, to build national institutions, to improve freedom of movement, cooperation in water, in commerce, in industry, so that we can learn to live together and lay the foundation for a future two-state solution. At the end of the day, Israel has no substitute for the United States of America as its ultimate ally. The United States is not only the supplier of vital strategic support, such as for Iron Dome, as we saw last summer. The United States is also our source for diplomatic Iron Dome. In international organizations that are not always amenable to the Jewish state, the United States has been there for us, and Ambassador Shapiro, you said it right. On the other hand, again, the United States has no alternative to Israel in the Middle East. There's no other country in this region that is technologically, scientifically, militarily robust and pro-American in a totally unreserved way, and democratic. Together, we work to maintain our relationship. We have no choice. It is our duty, it is our responsibility to ensure that the U.S.-Israel historic alliance remains robust and eternal. Thank you very much.